Hello and welcome to this tutorial on creating this industrial floor that I used in a scene called Sector 6 on my ArtStation. I'm going to be walking you through this graph and hopefully you can pick up a few tricks from it. To make it easier to follow along with the tutorial, I have taken a higher resolution screenshot of just the graph, which can be useful when following along with Substance Designer tutorials. Okay, so to get started, at first we're going to be focusing on the red areas here, which is our height map. And looking at the settings here, we can see I'm currently using the rounded cube in the 3D view. And we're going to change this to a, there we go, tessellation. Bump that up fairly high to 32. I'm just going to make that 2 on the scale. Alright, so we'll get started with our main shapes over here. Now I'm going to be using a handy node made by Daniel Thiger. Awesome artwork, check his stuff out on ArtStation and Gumroad. And he's made this preview node so we can see where we're up to in the 3D view. While I'm walking through this tutorial, I'm going to be clicking into the nodes, and if I don't talk about the properties I'm using, they will be on the right hand side here, so you can still see what I've set things at. Okay, so to start off, we're just looking to make this ramp here. So we've got our shape node and we've blurred it to get this sloping edge, and we've put that through a histogram range to lower it a bit, and then to get the lip that you can see that's come up here where the like rubber ends on the mat, we've run our range here through a histogram scan to just tighten it up a bit, and then we've blurred that slightly so it's not a really straight line, because that will cause lots of jagged artifacts, and we've just blended that over top with a max lighten at 0.4 opacity. To get the edges of the metal area, we've just got a shape node and we've squished that down, and then we've used a transform node to move it up, and due to tiling it's coming at the top at the bottom evenly, so that's offset by 0.5 on the y-axis. And then we've done a similar thing with another shape node, displaced it, offset by 0.5 on the x, and then we've just blended those together with a max lighten. Having them as separate shapes means that if we wanted to customize the width of one of them for our material, as you can see here, it's simple to do. Again, we've just blurred that on the edge through a blur HQ grayscale, put that through a histogram range to lower it down so it's not above where the matte edge is, and blended that in with a max lighten. Moving on to the next area of height, just got the support beam, so we've used a similar process, a shape node that's squished down, blurred it, and ran it through a histogram range to lower it in, and that's blended in again with a max lighten. After this we move on to the grate, which adds in the kind of steel lattice going across there, and so we've done this by using a tile sampler, 2 tile samplers, So set to quite far, quite a lot on the X, and the Y amount not so much. That's not as important, because with the Y amount we've bumped up the size to 1.5, and that's given us the full vertical lines rather than this kind of effect. Let's put that back. That's then gone through a tiny amount of blur and a histogram range. Haven't changed anything with this histogram range, but often I'll put that in so I can control it later. In this case I didn't, but still can be worth having. In this case I've done a very similar thing with slightly less amount on the X and Y, and of course flipped it around so there's more going horizontally. And we've run that through a blur and another histogram range, which is slightly lowered, so it's going through the vertical lines. With this tile sampler I have done it the opposite way of increasing the size of the X rather than the Y, which has been squished down. Blended them together with a max lighten and lowered into the blend with a histogram range. Now this of course is masked, so that is why it's only coming through this area, and that mask has been generated from the where we've added the support. We've then gone into a histogram scan, and that has been inverted and used as the opacity. Now to create the edge of the grate, there we go, the surrounding border, we have taken our histogram scan, we've blurred it, and then run it through another scan to essentially thicken the black area, but still in relation to where our outline is, and then we've subtracted the difference, just given us this outline, blurred it slightly, run through a histogram range, and blend it back on with a max lighten. Next we add the grip area. There we go. And so this has been a tile sampler with the disc pattern, 30 by 30. We've adjusted the size or scale down to something that felt about right, and we've offset it by 0.5 to get so it's not a straight line. And then of course we've got our mask map at full. Now the masks that we've got here is a histogram scan into the mask map input, and that comes from our main shape over here at the histogram range, and so this is defining our kind of walkway area over here. After that we've used a blur, HQ blur grayscale, to kind of make it so they're not perfectly straight and have a little bit of an edge to them. And what we've done here is we've used a min darken with this noise up here, so we've got a clouds and a grunge map 001, and so we've just blended that in with a multiply, and by using min dark with a lower opacity, that's kind of just adding that damage that's been done by a long time of being walked on with probably very heavy steel cap boots and kicked. Maybe someone's been dragged along it and given us all this damage effect here. That's now been lowered a bit with a histogram range and blended in over the top with a max lighten. And so we can see with the levels, some of them have been worn away or worn right through to the bottom. Okay, next in the material we add the rivets, or more large flathead screwdriver screws. I just thought it looked cool. And here we go, we can see that. We've just got a shape and we've inverted it and run it through a blur. I've then taken a shape at a slightly smaller scale. Oh, no, it's actually the same. In that case, I could just as easily hook that one in there and get rid of that. In this case then it looks like I've blurred it a lot more than I had the bottom one to kind of make that smaller, because I've then blended it back in with a max lighten over the top, and it's given us this little curve inwards bevel here. And from there, to get the cut into it there, we've just taken a shape node on square, dialed back the scale, dialed back the X value, ran it through a blur, HQ blur grayscale, and through a histogram scan, and that's given us that nice capsule effect. We've just inverted it and taken it out at just slightly lower opacity, so it's not really dark. From there, we've taken a transform 2D, and I believe I've also divided it by 2 to make it smaller. Moved it up to the top corner there and turned it a bit. The same thing with the second one. Cut it in half and just moved it up next to it. Blend those together with a min darken. Used a mirror grayscale on the top left corner, so it's at our 4 edges here. Used another blur and blended that in with a min darken at a quite low opacity. And the last part of our height map here is adding in the pipes that run through the grate. As you can see, we've got our 2 over here and 4 over here. And so how we've done these, to get our main shape, we've just grabbed a shape node and we've put in the X value down to 0.08. We've then blurred it quite a lot and run it through a curves node for just a little bit more control. We've then blended that into or over the top of the original shape, though that's not being seen at all because it's on copy. But we have used that shape as the opacity, which means that the blurred edge you can see from the curve is being cut off. Yeah, so it's like the edge of the pipe going round. From here, all we've done is used 2D transformation nodes. Where are we? And so we've squished it in a bit by holding control and moving along here to make it even. And we've just moved these around and blended them in. So we'll put our non-metal pipes here. They're blended with a max lighten. And we've done the same thing with the metal pipes, just moved them around and made one of them a little smaller and blended them in, and then run it through a histogram range to lower the value to where we want it to be. Okay, and that's blended into our final height with a max lighten. Cool thing, in case you didn't know, is that once you've got it all your blends set up, you can just click on one of the transform 2D nodes. You can actually move it around where you can see it in place. So this is how I did the placing, so I could see the position I was putting it in comparison to the rest of the material, and that's how we got them placed like that. And here's our final height. Alright, next we'll be moving on to the rest of our graph here. Just a note about my workflow is I'll often work in height for most of it until I need to add color or roughness or the metallic map to kind of get a better idea of what I'm making, but I try and work just usually with this preview node for as long as possible, so I can really get that height map looking good before I move on to adding other things. Okay. Okay, in this next section we're going to be covering the creation of the masks, and these ones down here in blue, and we're going to create these to isolate all of the different areas that we want to affect in the rest of our outputs. In the creation of the material, I created these on a as needed basis, so when I got up to a certain part I'd be like, okay, I need to make this mask now, but for this tutorial we're going to be going through them all at once, so it's going to streamline the later parts a bit more. And so a lot of the different isolations will make a bit more sense once we get to the color and the roughness, etc. Okay, so we're going to start off at the top of our masks area where we isolate this top section. So that's this area here, and this is a histogram scan of our grate after we've blended it together, and that is combined with this area here, which is made of the support beam at the start, just the shape from the support section of our height map, with a max lighten of the area that we used to define where our grate was going to go. It's a histogram scan at the start of the grate edge section. So with those two combined, we blend them here to create this top section. Alright, the next biggest area here is just the walkway, which we use for a lot of different things. This walkway area is just creating the difference between the rubber kind of walkway area and the metal surface of everywhere else, almost. And so this is just a histogram scan of our histogram range right back at the start of main shapes. So where we made this range here, we have just tightened that up in a scan, and that is the defining edge along here. Okay, these sections here are the areas of where our pipes are, and so for our pipes NM for non-metal, go to our non-metal section of our pipes, we grab the final blend that came out before it got joined with our metal pipes, and we've run that through a histogram scan, and then here we've blended this in with a divide to this top section that we just went over before, and that's isolated the gaps in the grate here that show through to where the non-metal pipes are. For the metal pipes, we've done the same thing. We've come down and grabbed our metal blend for our 3 metal pipes there. We've put them through a histogram scan. We've blended them with the divide with that top section. In this case, we've also done an invert. We do the same thing for the pipes, but it's just located in another section. Okay. Over here, we've got a defining area for our undersection. We've taken a histogram scan of our blended pipes over here. And then we've added that in with a max lighten to our top section from just before, and then we've inverted it with an invert grayscale, and this is isolating the area where there is no pipes and it's a gap through the grate into the murky unknown depths below. Our last section here is just isolating the metal area on top where these grates are, so not including the areas below like the pipes. And that is blending our walkway scan we went over a second ago, and the top section again. And by blending that with a subtract, that's given us this area here. So that covers this mask section. Moving down to the pipe rust masking area. Now, this is using Grunge map 25. Now, this is a SBSAR version of extra grunges that you can get from Substance Share, from Algorithmic, and I believe they've called it the Grunge Collection. And so if we go here, you can see that I've got, starting at this 001, we go down to 35 extra grunge maps, and then we've got our ones that ship with Substance Designer below. So I will pop a link to where you can get these from Substance Share in the description. They're really handy for creating all sorts of things, just a whole bunch of extra grunges, you know, who's complaining? I do use a few of these in the upcoming sections of the graph, so it could be useful. Okay, so we've established we're using Grunge map 025. Here I've just put this through an invert grayscale and blended that over the isolated section of our metal pipes. So this is coming from the invert at the end of our metal pipe section here. So it's this one here. And that is multiplying into this. Okay, our next area here is the non-metal pipes for the dirt. Now this is the invert grayscale that we didn't have up here in our pipes mask, so we can see we've got the invert for our metal pipes. This is the invert coming off the non-metal pipes blend here. So if we go back down to our invert, we've got two blends here with a Grunge map 20 from the extra grunges I was talking about just before. And we've changed the balance here. And in this blend, we've got a multiply with this set as the background and our invert grayscale as the foreground. And here we've got it the opposite way, where this is the foreground and our invert is the background, and this is subtracting instead of multiplying. And the difference this is giving us is the inverted versions here. So you can see those areas are changing, and that's just giving me the essentially where the dirt is and where the dirt is not. Okay, over here we've got the mask for the rivets. This is an invert grayscale off a node back at our rivet section that we didn't cover in the height map area if you saw this. So this is just a histogram scan that comes right after the mirror grayscale, 0.02 in full contrast, and that's giving us the isolated maps for the rivets. Okay, so after that scan it's just an invert grayscale to show them as white. And our last section here is the dirt mask, in which we've taken a dirt 4, the scale of 3, and we've run that through a histogram scan to kind of just pick up the top area of the kind of dirt noise. And so that's used with a 0 contrast and 0.3. Now we make a few different masks from here for use later on. So this one here is just multiplied with our walkway mask from up here. This one here. This one is a blend of our top section, also multiplied with that histogram scan. So we've got our top section from the masks multiplied with the scan. Now this one is then blended. This is a max lighten that comes from our non-metal pipes dirt. This is the one that was multiplied, and that's blended into that with a max lighten. On the bottom here we've just taken this again and we've subtracted the walkway instead of multiplied it this time. Okay, so that covers our masks that we're using for this material. A few of them will make a lot more sense in how they're used once we get into the outputs, which we can now jump into. At the end of recording this tutorial, I realized I'd forgotten to change one of my values, which meant that both my roughness and my albedo were outputting in 8-bit, the C8 here, instead of 16 bits. So we're just going to correct that now, and you do that by, at the roughness, my uniform color here, because it's going into the background of the original blend and it's outputting as 8-bit, the rest of the blends here are also outputting as 8-bit. You resolve this by clicking into the properties of the uniform color, changing the output format to absolute and making that 16 bits per channel, and the rest of the change updates. There we go. And so the same thing here for the albedo, the uniform color, absolute, 16 bits per channel. And now if we go over to the end result, that's now showing as 16, which is what we want. For the rest of the tutorial it will show as 8, and I didn't notice until afterwards, so I'm showing you that now so that you can correct that early on. Okay, so now we're ready to set up our outputs. To start with, we're going to plug something into our height in AO. So we're going to grab our final height, which is after we blend in the pipes, and we're going to plug that directly into our height output. That same blend is going to go down to our AO node, and that's going to take that down to 0.03, radius of 1, and 16 samples, and plug that into our AO output. That's all I did for this material. Okay. Now for roughness, the very first thing I've done, because you can see I've got my output here, and we're going to update that in our 3D view as we go along. But for now, just so if you're following along with this tutorial so you can see something in the 3D view, I usually start off by getting a uniform color and multiplying it over the top of the height, and that just gives me a really rough starting point that picks up a few of the details, and then I work on it from there. For normal, just for now, we're grabbing that same height and we've plugged that into a normal with 20 intensity, so it picks up a lot of the details. At the end of my texture, my normal was inverted, so I've got a invert here with the green flipped, and that goes into our normal output. We'll be adding the details to that as we go through the next step. To start off with, we'll go to the metallic first because we're going to run through our colors next. So the metallic is an invert grayscale node, and this comes, I believe, from our walkway. Now what this is doing, as you can see in the 3D view here, is it's making the rubber walkway part non-metal, and everything else is being included as metal. Now we update that as we go through here, but let's get back to our albedo. Okay, so right now here's my output. I've just got a uniform color plugged in, and that's just uniform color set to grayscale, and I've moved that up to 150, the V value. And to start off, I'll plug that in there, and we've got just the dark color there. So what I've done here is I've grabbed a Grunge map 20, that's one of the ones from Substance Share. I've plugged that into a gradient map to make it color, and I've blended that with a min darken over a uniform color, which is V value of 2.8. You can see here in the properties, sorry, 28, and that's blended in at a min darken, and that's just to give me this like kind of subtle worn color variation. Our main variation is going to come from our roughness later on, but I just wanted it to be like some of it's a bit worn out and the colors faded. I didn't want it to just be plain. Okay, now the the opacity that we've got here using as a mask is just a levels node with, let's move that across. Now there's no changes to this, I believe. The levels node was used here just to make it so there was not so many lines as there already is coming from walkway. So you can plug this straight in here to the mask. That's just to make it a bit tidier. Moving next, we add the wrong way around, the lines here, and so I've taken a uniform color with the value you can see here in the properties, and I've blended that over just copy, but I didn't want it to be just a straight paint over. For example, if we get rid of the, that's not what I was looking for. 1 second. There we go. I didn't want it to just be a nice flat newly painted color like that. I wanted it to be you know, scuffed and a bit damaged after a lot of use. And how we got that effect is by taking our levels node that we've used, or straight from the walkway node, mask I should say, and for customizability I took a shape node in square and I moved this to a size that looked about right, and I subtracted that from our mask, original mask here. And because this is the exact length of where our walkway edge ends, this is just taking out the middle part, so we could adjust this and decide we want it smaller or we wanted thicker lines. And it updates. Now to get the scratched and worn effect here, I've taken Grunge Map 15, which is also from the substance shear ones I was talking about before, and I've changed the balance a bit to make it a bit darker, and I've subtracted that. And because we've got this we've got this gradient value, it's giving a kind of part of it's wearing through, part of it's gone, although not much of it, and you can see all the detail that's come through here. Okay. After that, we've added the murky depths. And so that's just adding the darker areas to below the pipes, because we didn't want anyone to see that. That's nothing, so it's painted black. I didn't want it to be pitch black, and I know there's a value at which engines render it as black regardless in PBR. I'm not entirely sure what that value is, but that's the thing. And I blended that over a mask we created earlier, which was the one called Undersection. And as you can see, this is masking out the areas where the pipes are not, and so we've just darkened that up. Next we add the color for the non-metal pipes, and we made them red. And due to them, I'm thinking them like a kind of plasticky kind of pipe. We've just got a uniform color with the value here on the right. And we've blended that in with a copy, and I've slightly lowered the opacity here just to, I wanted to kind of dull the color a bit, and when I changed the opacity it just looked right. So if I take that up, you can see that's quite dark. But I wanted that kind of more of a dull color through it. And so that is masked out from the invert grayscale that we've got down in our non-metal pipes dirt. And blended in there. Next we've got the metal pipes and the rivets, so if we bring that up here we can see that's darkened our rivets and it's also darkened our metal pipes. To get the mask for that, first let's go to the color. The color for that is, as you can see here, we've just increased the V value. That's blended with the copy at full opacity, And now the mask for this is a blend of two of the masks we created before, one being our rivet mask down here, and the other, if we follow this line, is our pipes metal invert grayscale. So with those blended, with a max lighten, that's given us the mask to darken up these areas. Now here we add the rust in, like so, and you can see here we've got the rust along the metal pipes going under the floor. So these three. I envisioned that the top floor material was a kind of stainless steel, and so that didn't get rusty, but the pipes I imagined more of a more dull iron, which is why we made them a bit darker just before, and after being not looked after too well, they start to rust. And so how we've got the rust there is for the opacity. We've come down here to where our pipe rust is, and we've grabbed this area so that the white is where the rust is going to be, and as it transitions to black, that's where the rust is fading or not as strong. Down here. So it's this one that's plugging into our opacity. As for what's blending over with copy is this gradient map, and this gradient map has the grunge map that we used to make the mask earlier on. This is grunge map 025, which is from the substance share collection I was talking about before. And I thought this texture was, quite, it's got that grainy kind of look in there and interest enough, with enough conflicting kind of values that I thought that would work well for us. And so we grabbed that and we just plugged that straight into a gradient map. And to get all these colors here, went to the gradient editor and pick gradient, and I used the pick gradient tool down a scan of some rust. I do recommend using scans for your colors when you can. Get very accurate, being scans of course. And so that's how we blended that over. As we can see, we've got this kind of rusted patches from that. Okay, and the last thing we added to the color here is the dirt. And we added that with our with a copy, and our mask for this, if we go down to our dirt mask, is our final dirt mask here. Now this is why we added earlier on the where is it? Non-metal pipes dirt. We added this into it with a max lighten because we wanted the plasticky type pipes that didn't have any rust on them. We still wanted some kind of neglected look to them, and so we wanted them to be covered in dirt. I decided to not also add dirt to the metal pipe as well. That was more of a design choice, so you could kind of see the more of a contrast difference between the dirt and the rust, and I didn't want to cover it so much that you couldn't tell what the rust effect was on the metal pipe. But of course, if you were going for accuracy, you'd add that in as well and throw a little on. And so we've grabbed this, we've plugged that in there. Now to get the gradient map for this one, A similar process, we've grabbed the original noise that makes up our dirt areas, which is the dirt 4, and I've run that through a gradient editor, and I believe I also ran the pick gradient tool through a scan of some dirt, in this case of course because it's dirt, and that's given us the look there. So now we've got our color sorted. A few more things we needed to do before it's looking like we want it to. So now let's go back up to our metallic. And so here we've just got our invert grayscale that we're plugged into at the moment. Currently these pipes that are supposed to be non-metal are currently coming up as a metal, which we don't want. And so we have added a min darken from our invert grayscale. And this is the mask for our pipes, non-metal. And so because we've isolated the area where they are here in black, and our metal value or non-metal is represented by black, we've just min darkened that into here. Next we are grabbing our metallic map, and we are taking the rust out of the metal areas. Now generally you'd only have black and white values in your metallic map, but in some cases some argue that you can't, but I quite like the effect. You can use the grayscale value as something as covering a metal. So you know, you've got like dirt covering a metal surface, or rust over the metal pipes, and in some areas it's not quite as rusty. And so that's why here we've added in the area where the rust is, and we've taken it out of the metallic map. And so how we've done that is we've got a subtract blend, and the blend here is the pipe rust that we made before. And so if we go here, we can see this is where is our rust? In our here where we add in the color, we add that in with a copy. Oh, sorry. We use that as the opacity, and so that means that the white areas here from this node is where the rust has been mainly focused. And so by subtracting it, that's making the white parts black. So the white parts from this one are now black in here, being subtracted. And so as black is non-metal, that's meaning our rust is a non-metallic surface over our metallic surface. Hopefully that makes sense. Now on the same principle, here we've just taken the dirt out of the metal floor surface. And so for this, we've also used a subtract, and we go back down to our dirt mask, and we've got our dirt mask here. And we've grabbed this one and just subtracted it. And so now we've got our final metallic map. And in our 3D view, you can see the lights starting to react slightly different to here. Okay. Now, next we're going to go over the small changes we did to the normal map. So right now we've just got it plugged still into our final height. Now what we're doing here is we are adding, I believe, some noise in here to our rust. And for that we've grabbed a fractal sum base 2, a fractal sum base, and we've used the settings on the right here. We've cranked it up and made it really fine, but still a little bit blurry. And we've used a max lighten just to get pretty much, you can't really see it in the height map version here, but if we look over here in our normal, you can see the effect that it's having on the rusted areas. Now this is blended in with a max lighten at 0.02, and for the opacity, this is where we've used our pipe rust again. And so in the same value as our color, where it's going gray from the white to gray in those mid areas, it's only coming through slightly. Okay. Go. And yes, here was something I thought was pretty cool. Let's actually move this over here so we can see what's happening. So when we plug this one in, this has given us a slight wear in this middle matte area. So if we go into our normal, we can see this kind of negative effect that's coming out, like little bits have been taken out through wear and tear and scuffed boot marks, etc. And how we've done that is we've blended in the same noise that we used for our rust, the fractal sum base. We've blended that in with a multiply at 0.01. And here we have reused part of our dirt mask. And so we've just got our dirt to our histogram scan to this defining mask. And so that's why it's just affecting this area in here. And that covers our normal. Okay, finally we are on to our roughness, which will then complete the graph. Okay, so we went over before on how we just multiplied this into a uniform color to get that original roughness value. That's flat with a slight bit of detail so it reflects differently off the different heights. Next we are just getting in a big difference between the metal and non-metal reflectives, and we've done this by grabbing our good old walkway mask back up here. Given that it's perfect for the different values we want, as we want it darker on the metal parts and lighter on the non-metal parts, we've just multiplied that in. I've used 0.41, and that's kind of just given us that more, we can see more what the materials are. And when I was making this, I would have done this part quite early on. After I'd finalized my height, I would have set up my base roughness, and I would have set this up about the same time. I would have made my original colors up here, and so I would have got those broad color values and those rough color, those roughness values in place. So then I could then focus on layering and what effects was happening to the material. Okay, next what we've done here is we have made the rust areas a lot less reflective, because the rust is a dielectric kind of material, I believe, and wouldn't reflect as much as the iron pipe next to it. And we've done that by blending in the fractal sum base that we used up here for our rust. And the opacity we've got here is the, back up here, the pipe rust. I blended it in with a max lighten at 1, and that's given us this effect here. This area is just adding in a bit of variation to the parts of the pipe that aren't rusted. Let's see if we can see that. Doesn't show up too well. It's a very slight variation. But what we've done here is we've got this blend, which is a blend of our inverted grayscale from our pipe rust here before it's multiplied into this mask, and our pipe's mask, or our pipe's metal mask here. Now, what this is doing is we can see we've blended this in with a subtract, whereas over here we've blended it in with a multiply. So this is effectively the opposite of where our rust is. And the reason we've used that and thrown this over it is so that where it's not rusty, we've got this kind of like, maybe like water slime type roughness going over it. So that just makes a slight difference from it having nothing over it. Here we're adding a change in roughness for the dirt on our non-metal pipes, and so here we've got the non-metal pipes dirt, which was our mask for over here where the color went in, so that's it. Where our dirt is the white value, and we've just gone max lighten and made the opacity quite low, so it's just a slight effect so that we don't have the same light reflection off the pipe as to where the dirt is. So you can see it's more reflective off the pipe, and the dirt's not. The dirt has that effect. Okay, now here we go to our, we're still on the non-metal pipes but without the dirt. So if we look here and click in, you can see we've got quite a lot of other values going through. And this is the opposite one here. So when we made our non-metal pipes dirt masks, we had this one to indicate where the dirt was going to go, which is multiplied in, and then using the same noise we've subtracted it here to get the opposite area where the dirt is not. And so that's been used as our mask or opacity here, and our noise that we've got here is a Grunge Map 02, which I should have mentioned is over here as well. This is the one that ships with Substance, and I have turned it 90 degrees to kind of get that it's going down the sides of the pipes rather than down it, and that's just blended over quite strong, 0.36. Just add some variation to the reflection off that. Now here we are adding some noise to this metal up on the top. So here we're adding a lot of scratches that have just gone through. This area has been used very roughly for a long time, and so ignoring the color variation of the dirt, you can see where the scratches are reflecting along that edge there. Now all these three ones here are using the same mask, and this is a levels node that was put here for convenience rather than having three lines coming from where this is. And this mask is coming from all along here up to our floor metal mask back here, and so this is isolating this top floor area. So our first pass is adding these scratches. Our second part here is adding in some noise from like some dirt. And so this is done with a max lighten to pick up the lightest parts of the dirt, and the opacity has been dragged down so that it's not fully affecting it, and so that's giving us that kind of dirt area which should be corresponding to the dirt that we put in the color. So as we can see there, if we go up to our color, it's in the same areas because it's using the same noise, and it's giving us that same top part using the histogram. And then for more variation here, we added this noise just to kind of add some more variation into the map here, so it wasn't just scratches and dirt. Now this was using the max lighten, it was quite low, and the noise that we've got here is the noise that we turn sideways for our non-metal pipe. So we've just reused a couple of our noises here. Roughness is great for telling stories about your materials, so you could definitely go into a lot more detail and add things like, you know, scuff marks of boots and things like that into the color. But for this material, this worked well enough and looked quite good from a distance. It doesn't hold up too bad up close. Next, I wanted to give the rivets just a little bit of their own roughness values, because they are, by design, they were set in very slightly, and so that would change some of the noise that went into them. And so I grabbed Grunge Map 20 from the substance shear ones, and here we've just grabbed our rivet mask from before and added that in with a max lighten. So there's a subtle effect, but there is a slight difference. Next we move on to the hazard strips, and we wanted to make a difference in the roughness for this as well, of course, as the paint texture going across would be slightly different just to the rubber by itself. So we add that in there. So we hadn't touched our rubber area yet, and so we're adding in this part here. And so this is adding in with a subtract at a quite low value, 0.12. And this comes straight from where we add in the hazard paint up here. So the white value here is where the paint is strongest and not worn through. And by using this down here as a subtract, that means there's going to be a difference between where the paint's been worn and where it is still quite thick. Alright. After that, we're adding in the roughness for the grips over the top. And what we did for that to get quite a varied noise across all of these. So you've got a grunge map 16 and a grunge map 19. Played with the settings a little bit. Those are both part of the ones from Substance Shear. We've blended them together. This was a copy, and we just faded the opacity back a bit so it was kind of bleeding through. We blended that with a multiply at just under half strength, and we got this mask here, and we got this by, there we go, so this is a histogram scan that we grabbed back from our grip at the height map. And so this is just from when we did the histogram range, and so because it had already gone through the min darken here where we cut into the grip, because this scan is after that, go back here to the scan, you can see it's only picking up bits of it, the parts that haven't been cut out, which was a good effect because that means the kicked in or worn out parts of the rubber reflect differently to the part that hasn't quite broken through. So if we look, this one here, you can see it's a different effect on the top part, which I thought was quite nice. Go. And for the last part, we really rough up our walkway here. We can see there all that nice reflective value, making it a really lived-in floor. What we did here is we took our histogram scan with our eaten up grip, and we subtracted that from our walkway. And that was so that the roughness we put over here didn't travel over the same bumps that we'd already affected. And the noise that we put on here was a grunge map 15, also from Substance Shear, which gave us these nice scratched areas and these non-scratched kind of, but worn areas through here. So nice noise, and you can see that's come up really nice down at the bottom here, like something's been spilled in that area and things have been scratched. And that's blended in with a multiply 0.51, and that's our final roughness. And here we have the material taken into Marmoset Tool Bag 3, and this is how it turned out. Not too bad. Now, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. If it was, please let me know. This is my first tutorial, so if there's things I could do better, or if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. If you'd like to see the scene that I used this for, you can find it on my art station, and I'll drop that into the description. And I hope you had fun and learnt something making this industrial floor material. Thank you.